listening to the home of cool, irreverent, and entertaining talk, right here on LA Talk Radio. You're listening to The Art of Love with your host, Lucia, right here on LA Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to The Art of Love. My name is Lucia. I'm your host and a dating and relationship expert. And I'm here to entertain, educate, and enlighten you about love, dating, and relationships. Solve your dating dilemmas. Answer your emails. Take your calls. And, of course, speak to authors of books, which I find fascinating and interesting. And as usual, I've done it again, if I may say so myself. I found yet another book that will help us to understand this crazy thing called love. And it's called Decoding Love: Why It Takes 12 Frogs to Find a Prince and Other Revelations from the Science of Attraction. So let me get the author on. Hey, Andy, how's it going?
Hi, how are you? Good.
So let's see. Let me read your bio first, then you can tell us all about Decoding Love. Andrew Trees is a novelist and journalist who graduated from Princeton in 1990 and has a PhD from the University of Virginia in American History. He's written for the Chicago Tribune, Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Washington Post. And what is your website for this book, by the way?
www.decodinglove.com.
Is it just Decoding Love, or did you say something?
It's just decodinglove.com.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay.
I think also andrewtrees.com will get you to decodinglove.com. So either of those is fine.
Right. Okay. So what is the Decoding Love all about?
Well, you know, when I was growing up, my sisters were big fans of those relationship books that come out all the time, and
right.
They would always tell me to read them, and frankly, I thought they were terrible, and we used to joke about it, and I told them there must be something better. There must be some real science out there. And, you know, I hadn't, that was sort of in the back of my mind, and then I stumbled across a couple of studies that basically showed me that there was some really good science out there. And so I thought I would basically go and search and see what actual research had found about why people are attracted to each other. And, you know, I hadn't really, when I started the book, I didn't know that much about these different fields, but I was amazed by how much people have discovered about why we're attracted to people we are, how we're attracted, how it all works. It's pretty fascinating.
Yes, as we're about to find out. So let's start from the subtitle for your book. So why does it take 12 frogs to find a prince?
That comes from one of the sections of the book deals with something called game theory, which has been used for all sorts of things. But one of the things they've started to apply it to is looking at basically how human beings pair off and mate. And I won't bore you with all the math, but they ran all sorts of statistical studies using something called the dowry game, and it's kind of this. It's basically a version of a game where you have 100 women or men, whichever you prefer, 100 women to choose from, and you get to look at them one at a time, and each comes with a dowry, and your job is to pick the woman with the highest dowry. And so they ran this scenario with all sorts of things. If you want the best chance of picking the highest dowry, you have to basically go through the first 37 people you see, and then you pick the next highest dowry, which gives you about a 37% chance of finding the highest dowry. But those are kind of what they were really interested in looking at is the best way of sort of finding someone, let's say, who's really good, like in the top 10% of the dating pool. And they ran this with all sorts of scenarios, from all the way from 100 people to 10,000 people. And that the rule they came up with was basically try a dozen. That if you go out with a dozen people and then pick the next person who's better than that first dozen, you have a pretty good chance of ending up with someone in the top 10% of the dating pool. So that's the subtitle.
Right.
So you have to date 12 people first, and then the next person that's better than those first 12, that's the one you pick.
Oh, okay. All right. Then I missed my window of opportunity. I've dated more than 12.
Well, no. So that's the thing. Just because that doesn't mean that you'll pick like the 13th person. I think the average they came up with, like, I might get the number a little off, but I think they said on average people end up dating about 33 people before they get to someone who's better than those first 12.
Ah, okay. Good.
So you shouldn't expect it to be like the 13th or 14th person. It actually takes a while to find someone better than that person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I wish it was that easy, that it was just the 13th person.
I know exactly. That's right. You just burn through them one, and
Right.
then, before you know it, you're done.
You're
True
done.
love.
Now, you said that men are quick to lie in order to have sex, and so women are better off at being skeptical, that they should be skeptical all the time?
Well, this is the funny thing is, women actually have certain built-in evolutionary advantages over men in the sense that their brains tend to have more connections when it comes to things like judging the emotions on another person's face and things like that. That should help them sort of uncover when men are lying. But,
Right.
but what the studies have shown is that even though they have this advantage, most women are still not very good at doing it. And since men are so prone to lie in various contexts in relationships, either to get sex or whatever, that most of the people who study this say that the best attitude for women to take is skepticism. Don't believe what he says. Look at what his actions tell you. Look at how he treats you. It's very easy to say, "Oh, I love you," and you're the one. It's much different to actually prove it with how you behave.
Aha, so make sure the actions match up with the words.
That's right. And I should say this to take us a little farther down this pathway. One of the reasons it's so hard to detect deception is that one thing that happens is they found that people are very good at deceiving themselves. So let's say in the heat of passion, when a man really is attracted to a woman and really wants to sleep with her, there's a very good chance that when he tells her he loves her and he wants to be with her, he's convinced himself that that's the case. And it's only after he sleeps with her that he'll wake up the next morning and suddenly think, "Oh, I was wrong, actually. I don't love her the way I thought I did, and she may not be the one." So men deceive themselves as well, which is one of the reasons why it's so hard to figure out whether they're telling the truth or not.
So at some point, do men kind of slow down with the lies and tell less lies?
Well, they have found actually that as men get older, I'm talking a lot older actually.
Uh-oh.
But
Like how old?
When men get a lot older, they
60?
do get better. But I should say women don't get off the hook on this. I mean, there's lots of evidence that women deceive at not quite as great a rate, but it's still at a fairly frequent rate when it comes to dating as well. I mean, they did one really funny study where, of course, one of the things that men worry about, of course, is they don't want a woman who's, well, let's say, easy, because they worry about paternity. They don't want a woman who's going to sleep around on them, and if she has a child, it may not be his child.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing that women have realized is that they should lie about the number of sexual partners they've had,
Yes.
and basically lowball the figure.
Mm-hmm.
So they did this funny study where they asked college women how many sexual partners they had, and they gave one number, and then they hooked them up to a fake lie detector and told them it was a real lie detector and asked them again how many people they'd slept with, and the number went way up. So women tend to do the same thing, but they lie about different things. They don't necessarily lie about the same things.
Right. And then also back to the skepticism, you said, so in a relationship, women shut off their skepticism.
Well, that's right. Evolution has shaped women basically to try to find a man who's willing to commit for the long term, because since they're the ones who get stuck with the biological fact of not just having the child in their bodies for 9 months, but actually raising the children, they want a man who's going to stay around and help them with that. And so one of the things that their mind has sort of been shaped to do over time is when they find a suitable partner to really develop much more of a bond. And one of the ways is exactly what you're saying, that once they're with a guy, once they've slept with him, once they feel like there's some sort of connection, they actually become much less skeptical and much more willing to kind of take the guy at his word and see him as a long-term partner, even if his actions don't demonstrate that.
Mm-hmm. So you think maybe that's the reason why women tend to stay with guys that aren't good for them?
Yes. No. Well, there are a whole slew of reasons
Yes.
why that happens. Although it's interesting, now that sort of in the age of feminism, where a lot more women have the opportunity to pursue careers and are much more successful financially. The good news is that this has meant that they no longer have necessarily the pressure economically to stay in a relationship, and they've actually found that women who are successful career-wise are much more likely to divorce their husbands than women who have no career. So it basically by giving them more economic success,
right.
It's given women the chance to pull the escape hatch in the same way that men used to.
Right. Well, I don't know if you know that, Karl Marx, he said that economics determine social structure.
Exactly. I mean, that's exactly what we're talking about here. I think the kind of one weird way that Marx doesn't gel with what's going on is that, I think we have both this sort of social and cultural level, which can change very quickly, right? I mean, you go back just to the 1950s, and the role that women had in society was very different than it is today.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're also shaped on the evolutionary level, which works so much more slowly. And I think that's one reason why we kind of have a weird situation when it comes to things like mating and when it comes to being married. In some ways, our cultural and social changes are far ahead of where we are in terms of evolution. We're still stuck much back in a sort of a caveman mentality.
Right. In fact, speaking of cultural changes, I don't know if you're aware that I specialize in cougar relationships.
I know, which I find quite a fascinating phenomenon.
And in fact, I want to read something from your book here, and then we'll talk about it.
Okay.
You said...
I think I know what you're going to read.
Oh, really? What do you think I'm going to read? Put you on the spot.
I think I made some comment in there where I was sort of dismissive of the cougar phenomenon. I didn't think it was a really significant trend.
Right. No, I understand that. And a lot of people believe that. But, me being on the inside track and, driving the phenomenon myself, I have an opposite opinion, obviously. But I totally understand how people can think that we're all crazy.
Well, I think I've modified my position a little since I wrote the book. So I'll let you read it, and then we can talk about it, because I think I'm starting to think that the whole idea of the cougar is more important than I had first given it credit for being.
Yeah, you may have to do a rewrite.
That's right.
Yeah, because I understand that biologically the way we're set up, it's you write the chapter or just the part why young women end up with old men and not vice versa.
Exactly.
And what you wrote was an older woman with a younger man violates these norms. We're talking about cultural norms, obviously. There's no culture or reason why this should be the case. Our shock can be traced directly to how evolution has shaped us.
That's right. Where it typically, because of evolution, men are the ones who really care about fertility, right? And so youth is really important to them. And women tend to care much more about a good provider. So it's okay to be with an older man because that also tends to mean that he's more stable, more financially independent, all those sorts of things. But I think where I got that wrong is I think these days, as more and more women find that kind of success that was traditionally really more only available to men, that I think that the cougar phenomenon is a real social and cultural phenomenon. It's actually growing in importance more than I gave it credit for.
Yeah, because, people go, oh, it's just a trend. People are just jumping on the bandwagon. But, in fact, Newsweek said the cougar will be extinct by next year.
I think unless you, and I wouldn't want to do this. I mean, I consider myself a feminist. Unless you turn back the clock and basically eliminate women from, high-paying, high-power positions.
Yes.
There's no turning back the cougar clock. Because I think once you open that up to women, there's no reason why then they can't seek out young men, if not for exactly the same evolutionary reasons, but at least for perfectly good social and cultural reasons.
Yeah, the way I put it was I said women are out of the cougar closet and we're not going back.
That's right. I mean, I think in some ways probably what limited it before was not just the financial opportunity, but the fact that there was more of a social stigma, and I think that's definitely eased over the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, and also I think the problem that people have is because, obviously men put looks as a high priority. They want their women to be very attractive. And,
right.
Obviously before Botox and the fillers and all that stuff, it was hard to stay attractive over 40.
I know, you're absolutely right. And the funny thing is, even though we know that these cosmetic surgeries don't change the underlying youth of the person, they do fool us. I mean, in evolutionary terms, you find men respond to those sort of cosmetic enhancements in exactly the same fashion they would if they were just nature, right? If they if they didn't have anything to do with being, with going to a dermatologist and getting Botox or anything like that.
Yeah, and then also, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so you look at someone, I mean, the perfect example, right, and I think the one who helped kind of bring this other cause is someone like Demi Moore, right,
Sure.
who looks fantastic, right, looks really young and is incredibly successful, and she has this, much younger partner, and I think it kind of shows with these changes how this is going to become, if not, it'll probably never be the majority, but a reasonably significant kind of social minority that's going to grow in importance over time.
Right, and then also besides the looks, women are taking better care of themselves. They're working out, so now their bodies don't have to fall apart again after age 40.
That's right.
Whereas it seems,
it makes perfect sense. Women live longer than men too. I mean, if anyone should be looking for a younger partner, it's a woman, right?
Okay.
So at least she can have this younger partner for her lifetime.
Right. Otherwise, the women, they marry the older man, then the man dies, they get his money, and then they marry a young guy.
That's right.
That's how it's going to work from now on.
That's right. You can work both sides these days. Right? You can marry the older man and inherit the money, and then turn around yourself and go after the younger guy.
Oh God. So now, do you think that, or have you found that humans are naturally monogamous?
That's something I explore in the book, and I'm married, so obviously I'm part of the monogamous system. But
right.
I think monogamy is a system we will always struggle. Oh man, not always. If enough evolution occurs, we may fit more normally in it, but it's something we're always going to struggle with. You can see certain biological markers in our own bodies that show that we had a polygamous past, and the vast majority of societies that have been recorded in human history have been polygamous. So monogamy is a relatively recent and not an entirely comfortable arrangement. But again, this sort of evolution and social and cultural things go together, right? So just because it's not the most natural arrangement doesn't mean that, especially in this day and age, that you can't work within monogamy to have a perfectly happy, healthy relationship. I mean, there'll be struggles, right? I mean, men have a greater desire for sexual variety, so that will always be an issue. But it's the kind of thing where they've definitely found that, to give you two weird examples, for instance, male and female body size over time has come closer and closer to being equal, which is one sign of a monogamous species, so we're clearly moving in that direction. Testicle size is another indication of polygamy, and our testicles indicate that we are a polygamous species, but the amount of sperm that our testicles produce has actually been going down over time, so it seems like that, again, in that direction, there's kind of a slow trend towards monogamy. So if we all hang in there long enough,
yes, long enough, okay.
one day we may be perfectly happy.
Do you know why the amount of sperm has gone down over time?
Well, just it's based on the size of our testicles compared to other animal species. Other animal species typically would produce much more sperm.
Oh, okay.
What they theorize, this is not definitively proved, but what they theorize is that as monogamy has become more widespread and as there's been less polygamy and kind of less what you might call sperm competition, there's been less need to produce great volumes of sperm. Because one reason why testicle size is an indicator of polygamy is that you get larger testicles when you have species in which, let's say, males have large-sized harems, or when there's a lot of competition for those females. Because when there's competition for the females, it means that multiple men or multiple males, I should say, may be sleeping with the female. And so the more sperm you can basically put into the game, the better chances are your sperm will be the one to fertilize the egg. So, gorillas, which have harems, so there's no male competition, they have tiny testicles. And chimps, which have tons of competition, right? They're sleeping with everyone. They have huge testicles. And humans fall a little more towards the chimp side of the spectrum than we do the gorilla side of the spectrum.
Okay. And then you said something which I love, and I'm glad you said this, and I'm sure you have science to back it up. You said women should worry a lot less about getting married, and men should worry a lot more.
That's right, and this is one of the funny things in the book that I found. I think there are a lot of paradoxical things, You look at the stereotypes. The stereotype is always that it's the poor woman who doesn't get married, right, who's the spinster, who's alone, surrounded by her cats. And men are always seen as these great, lucky guys, these swinging bachelors, right, who have this fantastic life. The funny thing is that they found that in health terms, men benefit far more from marriage than women do. I mean, women benefit a little bit when they get married, but men, all sorts of things in terms of their health, in terms of their chances of dying of some sort of heart disease or dying earlier, all those sorts of things go way down once they marry. And they've also found that men, on average, are happier in marriage. Women, it's a little more ambiguous. I mean, some studies show actually that single women tend to be happier than their married counterparts. So if you look at it just as a kind of overall picture of who benefits the most from marriage, men seem to benefit in much more clear-cut ways than women do at times.
Yeah, and yet isn't it funny that they're the guys that are most reluctant to get into a marriage?
That's right. Well, again, and you can trace this back to evolution, right? Which is that part of what men, the early days of kind of human evolution, shaped men to basically want to procreate with lots of females and spread their genetic material.
Right.
And so men are always going to be much more reluctant to commit than women. Or I shouldn't say always, but let's say for the foreseeable future.
Yes.
To commit than women are, because women are the ones who have always had to bear that cost of having the egg, having the child, raising the child, and so there's a lot more pressure on them to basically try to find a man who's willing to commit to them for the long term.
So maybe we just need to have them read that section of the whole book, the section of your book that says they'll live longer. Maybe that will inspire them to get married.
I know. If there are any single men who are listening to this, they should definitely,
take
a look at the health evidence. Marriage would be great for you in terms of your longevity, and also all sorts of other benefits. I mean, these are going to sound funny, and it is just numbers that economists have come up with, but they've come up with all these numbers that basically show that people who are in a happy marriage, and the key is not just marriage,
right,
but a happy marriage,
of course,
there are all sorts of benefits that they quantify in dollar terms, so that a happy marriage can be worth, in various ways, tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of dollars towards your happiness. By which I mean, like, if you say, like, okay, being married, I can't remember the exact figure, but something like is worth something like $100,000 a year in happiness, which gives you the same amount of happiness that earning an extra $100,000 would. Which I always say, could you find an easier way to earn an extra $100,000 a year? I mean, that, how can you turn that deal down?
Right, exactly. If it's the happy marriage, of course.
That's right. That's right.
But then you also said that for women, not being married shortens their life more than cancer or poverty.
Well, that's the thing. I think these statistics are worse for men than they are for women. But they found, and the reason is this. That sounds pretty extreme, right?
Yeah,
that not being married will shorten your life more than various diseases. The reason is, for a lot of people, when they get married, this is particularly true for men. I think this is why those statistics are so clear for them. When you're not married as a single guy, you tend to do things that are bad for you. For instance, you tend to drink a lot more. You tend to smoke a lot more. You tend to eat less healthy food. You tend to eat more fatty food. So it's not just the relationship per se. There are all sorts of things that go along with being in a good relationship that will also increase your health.
Right. Lifestyle.
And I could also throw in one wild card, which we haven't talked about, which is that one of those things is they found, unsurprisingly, that people in a married relationship have more regular sexual activity than people who aren't married. And sex has really good health benefits as well. It's good for your circulation. It boosts your immune system. It makes you less depressed. So just having a regular sexual partner in marriage is a huge boon to your health.
Right. But okay, getting back to what I had said, you had written that for a woman not being married, it shortens her life more than cancer or poverty.
It's the same thing. I do remember the poverty thing. I don't remember the cancer thing. I'll have to look through there, but I'm sure you looked at it more recently.
Yes.
It's the same thing with women in the sense that, again, you don't take care of yourself. Often you don't take care of yourself as well when you don't have a partner who is there kind of watching out for you as well. So the same things hold true for women that hold true for men, right? So, for instance, I can tell you recently, I had a persistent cough. My wife's like, you should go see the doctor. I saw the doctor. It was no big deal. But that's the kind of thing I think when you're single, a lot of times you're like, oh, I'm fine. You struggle through. When there's someone else there, they do things like they watch out for your health. They watch out, if you're gaining a lot of weight quickly. Little things like that can really make a huge difference in your overall health. So a partner who cares about you, keeps an eye on you, is a huge health benefit.
Right. I've always said, I was looking for the fountain of youth. And I said that, I jokingly say, but only half jokingly, of course, that not being married and not having children is the fountain of youth. Because, especially if it's a bad marriage, it stresses you out and you don't have as much time I'm talking about for women. You don't have as much time to take care of yourself. And, you see the wives running around in the sweats and their hair up with no makeup.
Well, this is why the key issue is the happy marriage, right? Because I think you can look at it three ways, right? If you're in an unhappy marriage, that's worse than being single, right? Because they found that unhappy marriages creates all sorts of stress on you, psychologically, emotionally, and that has really big repercussions for your health. Mm-hmm. So an unhappy marriage, that's bad. Single, right? A lot depends on how you are. Some people are very happy being single. Mm-hmm. I think women in particular, men do as well, and this is maybe why the stereotypes comes into play. Women are more companionable in general. I think there's a certain amount of loneliness that creeps in. That can take its toll. If you're in a happy marriage, you find you get all sorts of health benefits, right? As opposed to the stress, you find someone who helps you relax, right? So you're even more relaxed probably than the single person. So it's one of those things, a lot depends on the type of marriage you're in, but if you're in a really good marriage, it can have all sorts of positive benefits.
Right. The key is happy marriage.
That's right. Happy marriage. That's the key. Not just marriage,
right.
Happy marriage.
Exactly. Now, you also said that living together is not a good idea, which I totally agree with.
That's right. Well, what the studies have shown is that people who live together, even if they end up getting married, are more likely to get divorced than people who've never lived together before they got married. And the reason, they're not sure about this, but what they think is that once you live together without being married, it sort of puts in your mind the idea that this is not a permanent relationship. So you can always pull the plug at some point if you're unhappy. And one of the things that a lot of the research shows is that almost all marriages, I should say, go through phases, right? Even happy marriages are not blissfully happy all the time.
Right.
And so if you have the kind of attitude where you're like, as soon as I'm unhappy, I'm getting out of this relationship, then you're probably not going to last long term in a relationship because they're going to be rough patches.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you live together before you get married, it sort of plants that seed early on that this is just a temporary situation, and if I become unhappy, it's something that I can change. And I think that's one of the hard lessons about marriage, right? That even happy marriages, you have to be willing to struggle through some of those hard times and work through things.
Yeah, because I think people go into a marriage thinking, oh, now it's going to be happily ever after. We'll never argue again. Everything's going to be blissful.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's one of the big things I try to argue about in the book is that we have this really misguided notion of what a good relationship should be. And we have, I think, exactly the idea you're saying about, which is this kind of Cinderella vision, right? That once you find that perfect person, you end up together and there's no problem, right? That's the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the crazy thing is they've done studies and they found that people in arranged marriages, right, who haven't chosen their partner end up happier on average than people who are in Western-style marriages where you've chosen your partner.
Yeah.
And the reason they think is that people go in with such high expectations in Western marriages that it's really tough to meet those expectations. In fact, one study, a long-term study of couples, showed that those couples who were most in love when they got married, right, they
Mm-hmm.
had that whole dewy-eyed thing where
Mm-hmm.
they thought they'd found the perfect partner, they were the most likely to get divorced.
So does that mean that Khloe Kardashian and Lamar Odom are going to divorce?
I know. I do have my worries about that couple.
When they got married,
I think
go ahead.
I would say I think the problem is, right, we get caught up in that kind of love where you're just in this sort of passionate frenzy. And that's wonderful. I mean, I know how intoxicating that sensation can be. But that's really more of a chemical kind of love. And that all the studies show that fades over time. And so whether it fades in 3 months or whether it fades in 2 years, if that's your benchmark for how the relationship has to be, that's going to go away. So you have to learn to really find a deeper level for that relationship to work. And it's not that you lose all passion, but it's going to kind of burn at a lower heat. So you have to be willing to accept that the relationship's going to change over time and not expect to always be in that phase where, you know, you just think about the person all the time, you can't sleep, you can't eat. That's really just a temporary thing. And to expect the relationship to sustain that is really setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah, because if it was always like that, then no one would ever get anything done.
That's right. We would still be living in caves.
Exactly. Just sitting there dreaming about the other person.
That's right.
So it's a matter of survival. Now, you also say it's better for women to be prudish rather than slutty.
Well, that's right. One of the big things they found, and there are all sorts of ways to talk about this,
Mm-hmm.
and this basically goes back to the animal kingdom again, is that it's something one way to think about it is what you might call a signal you're sending off to the opposite sex. So if you're a woman and you sleep with a guy pretty easily, it shows that you think you're not in really high demand and you don't have to hold out for the right guy.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you're someone who is selective and really takes your time, doesn't immediately sleep with a guy, you're sending the signal that you're basically a high-quality mate, that you don't need to sleep with every man that comes along who wants to sleep with you, and that you can basically hold yourself back and wait for something better. And this holds true. They found something they called the affective shift. After guys sleep with a woman, typically, they become less committed and less in love with her. And so for women, you want to – for many of us, this is going to be very upsetting. For women in general, you really want to, as much as possible, however long you normally wait to sleep with a guy,
mm-hmm.
you should wait longer.
Right.
Right? So I always joke, like my rule of thumb, if you're a woman, is you should just double it. Right? If you're asleep with a guy after the third date kind of woman, go for 6 dates. And if you're a 1 month kind of woman, go for 2 months. That longer, in this case, is always better.
Right. But then some people, they sleep on, like after 6 dates, that still doesn't seem like a lot.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, whatever you do normally, just double it, right? If 6 dates seems short to you, if you're a 10-date person, then wait 20 dates, right? Whatever's your norm, make it longer. That's my attitude.
See, I tell them wait at least 3 months.
See, I think that's great because no, seriously, I think that's a really good idea because I think 3 months, especially if you're dating pretty regularly, that's giving you enough time to really establish whether this is a guy who is demonstrating consistent interest in you, who's not just there for a one-night stand, it's not just there for a quick hookup,
mm-hmm.
and you've had a chance to really begin to develop a bond that's beyond merely physical attraction.
Right.
So I think that's 3 months, a lot of people, especially young people
Yes,
living in big cities,
they
probably
can't
look at
wait.
that number and are like, "What, are you crazy?
I know,
You're insane."
I know.
But the studies really show that women who wait longer are generally more successful when it comes to dating.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I told recently a guy who's about 28 about waiting the 3 months. He's like, "What?" He goes, I had to wait 1 month once, and that was torture.
Well, they found, it's funny, they one of the a recent study I read by some British researchers was that they looked at precisely that, and they found that the women who waited longer did, in fact, attract higher quality mates. And ironically, you would think high quality men might think, "Oh, I can sleep with someone much easier," but they actually are attracted to that kind of woman who values herself enough not to sleep with them right away. So they actually tended to get men who were higher quality than women who had sex quickly.
Right. Okay. So once and for all, then men do not. Men do care whether you sleep with them on the first date or not, meaning that if you do, they're going to judge you harshly.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, and this is, there's lots of research, but I also found this when I did interviews with men when I was doing the book. Anecdotally, almost universally, the quickest way for a woman to turn herself from someone a man is interested in long term to someone he's interested in short term is to sleep with them too quickly.
Right. Exactly. I know, because I've had people on the show say, "Oh, no, men don't care. Go ahead." And I'm like, wait a minute.
They'll tell you they don't care.
Right, of course. I knew that didn't sound right. And, you said that, as you said earlier, men, after they sleep with the women, they have less interest, and whereas for women, it's the total opposite. They have.
That's right. That's exactly right. So it's, I think I interviewed some women who clearly at times had practiced what you might call a strategy of kind of sexual commitment, where they thought, okay, if I sleep with him, then he'll be more committed to me.
Uh-huh.
That is exactly the opposite of what happens. So for women who try to use sex as a tool to get a man to become more committed, that's almost guaranteed to backfire.
Right. So, and then also because the women, they start to like the guy more once they do have sex.
That's right. So it's a double whammy, right? They think they're going to get him to commit more, and he is likely to commit less, and they're going to find themselves feeling even more committed than they were before they slept with them. So
it's a catch-22.
That's not a good deal for women.
No, and so I think maybe the solution is to take it in stages. Like instead of having once you do have intimate contact, instead of having intercourse right away, maybe like on one date start with kissing, maybe then a week later move to something else, et cetera, et cetera. So you spread it out like over a month.
Well, that's right. That's actually I think a great idea, and I talk in my book about the fact that I think another thing that women should keep in mind is that they should try to keep the sexual aspect of the relationship something of a challenge for the guy, right? Don't make it automatic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not trying to suggest any elaborate games playing, but in the sense that even once you've slept with him, that doesn't mean every time you see him you have to have sex with him again. One thing they found is that if sex becomes too regular and too predictable, dopamine levels naturally sag over time, and so the guy will feel sort of less passion and kind of that less of that chemical kind of love.
Right.
And so I think it's a good idea for a woman just to introduce an element of challenge where the guy is constantly trying to sort of demonstrate his affection, his love, in order to, let's say, and I'm not trying to suggest a quid pro quo, right? He has to do certain things in order to get sex.
Right.
I'm trying to suggest that you treat it in a way in which he doesn't start to take you or sex with you for granted.
Right. So it's like positive partial reinforcement.
Exactly.
I wrote an article on that. That's why I know all about that. Now, you also say, and I found this interesting, that men fall in love faster, and yet women are more pragmatic when it comes to love.
Isn't that funny?
Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely right. They found, and this is not true for all men. I mean, some men tend to be more cynical, but men do tend to be the more romantic, fall in love fast, and women do tend to be more the skeptical. And again, this goes back to evolution, where for men, of course, there's a payoff to sort of falling in love fast and being passionate and seducing a woman and sleeping with her, right? Because you get that potential genetic payoff of a baby with your genes.
Mm-hmm.
Women who have to carry that whole burden have sort of been, over time, have evolved to be a little more realistic about it and to realize that, whatever happens, they're potentially stuck with this long-term burden of raising a child. And so they're a little less likely, ironically, even though they're seen as the more romantic sex, to be swept away by everything and to forget about all practical considerations.
Good. See, we're finding out all kinds of things about guys we didn't know. And then you also say, and this is bad for me, men value intelligence and ambition only if they do not exceed their own intelligence and ambition.
Well, I have to say, this is one of those sad aspects where I feel like our culture has outraced our evolution, right? In the sense that now that you have women who are very successful and highly educated and all those other things, this has created some weird problems, I think, for women at that end of the dating scale. Like a woman, let's say, who has an advanced degree and earns a big salary. Most guys, not all of them, but most guys are threatened by women who earn more than they do, who have more education than they do, who are more ambitious than they are. And so this is a real problem for very successful professional women. There's no great answer to this. I mean, I think this is one of those kind of sad paradoxes of the modern dating world where, women who become too successful career-wise can find themselves facing this almost minuscule dating pool. Because, if, let's say, a woman has a master's, well then, a lot of men with just a college degree won't date her. And let's say she earns, $200,000 a year, well then a lot of guys earning like, $50,000 a year won't date her. And so, and let's say a woman, meets her male counterpart, well, he's willing to date her, of course, but he's also willing to date, let's say, a woman who's 10 years younger and hasn't spent all that time getting the degree and having the career success. So,
right.
For successful professional women, it's a tough dating world, I think, out there.
Do you think also maybe because these women, because they're so intellectual and they're always in their brain, that they can't switch off when they're a woman and return to just being a woman and being more emotional?
Well, it's funny. That is, they have found that one problem. Studies have shown that there's certain things that if you talk about them too much, it actually is counterproductive. That our talk actually confuses the issue. And they've done this and looked at all sorts of things. And one of the areas this I think occurs, and women are really susceptible to this, is if women are the type to get together with their friends and endlessly dissect men and relationships. I know it's very fun to do this,
yes.
but this is actually, in general, not very good for your relationships. And what they is that if you do it too much, you actually make it harder to develop that sort of gut-level intuitive instinct of whether or not you want to be with that guy. That all the talk kind of confuses the issue. So, I know a lot of women like to do this, but my advice would be actually to
tone it down.
You can't talk about them all, but don't pick over the new guy for 2.5 hours. That's not a good idea.
And yet we love doing it so much.
I know. Well, women tend to be more verbal than men, so they like to do this, and it just it's a real problem.
I know. I mean, we analyze every little thing. I mean, I'm surprised that 99% of the CIA is not all women.
Perhaps they're worried they would read too much into it.
That's true too. Now, on a lighter note, you mentioned something about lipstick, that women should always wear lipstick, which is funny because I've had that on my website for years. I've said, like, what advice would you give to women? And I said, always wear lipstick. And
They've actually done a study about this, and they found that showing men the same picture of a woman with and without lipstick, she's judged significantly more attractive with lipstick on.
See, and I didn't know that, but I just knew.
And my guess would be, again, this is one of those kind of subtle evolutionary cues that lip color is often an indication of youth, that women tend to have, brighter, fuller lips when they're younger, and lipstick just helps give that look.
Right. Okay, so we're not talking about black lipstick.
No, you could probably wear lipstick in a certain way, which would be counterproductive.
Right, yeah. It has to be pink or red. Now, you also say that men with feminine traits make better husbands. So which feminine traits are we talking about here?
Well, I think it's all the things that you would expect, right? I mean, these are kind of men who would probably be willing, more open to talking about with women about themselves, about their relationship, more willing to help around the house, more interested in, let's say, some of the things you might more traditionally think of as female things. I think if a woman can find a man who we can all think of the hyper-masculine stereotype of the guy who only watches football and drinks beer. I'm not trying to suggest all those men are bad partners, but studies show that the guys who have both masculine and feminine traits, so the guy who, does those things, but also likes to cook with his girlfriend or his wife, also likes to read the same sorts of books, that's the kind of guy who will make a better husband in general.
So then does that mean that women with some masculine traits might make better wives?
Well, they found that men actually prefer not hyper-feminine women, but women who have both feminine and masculine qualities as well.
Uh-huh.
And I think this is potentially an optimistic finding for how we're evolving to be, better at monogamy. The kind of hyper-masculine, hyper-feminine ideals that we carry around with us don't match up as neatly with what people actually want as we think they do.
Right. Yeah, what people say they want and what they actually react to are usually two different things.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's one of the funny things that the research shows. I mean, there's a lot of evidence that what people say they're looking for in a partner, in a relationship, in someone of the opposite sex, often does not match up with what they really look for. And this is one of the funny things, that your friend is in some ways, they've found, does a better job of predicting what you would like in a partner and also how long you might stay together with someone than you yourself do.
Oh, wow. So it's more important to get your friends' opinions then.
Well, this is the tricky thing, right? So don't dissect the boyfriend for 2.5 hours at brunch, but it's not a bad idea to ask your friend, what kind of guy do you think I would like and I would be good with? Because your friends actually often have a better, more accurate picture of you than you yourself do. I mean, we sort of constantly engage in little acts of self-deception that, of course, we don't realize that we're doing. So it's very useful to have good friends who know us well to help kind of give us a basic sort of check to what we might be interested in and what we might look for.
Yeah, I know it's funny because my friends always think that I should be with some guy that looks like he walked off the cover of Esquire, a professional with a suit, and I totally do not date those guys.
See, maybe you should try one.
I know.
If they're telling you, maybe you need to give it a try.
I know. Maybe that's why I'm still single, because I don't date the guys my friends think I should be dating. One day. Now, also in terms of testosterone, it seems that if guys have more testosterone, they're more likely to cheat. So do you know what some traits of guys that have a lot of testosterone would be?
Well, see, this is one of the funny things. Well, this will probably lead us into many complicated areas, but it's interesting that you bring that up. I mean, we're just talking about women liking men who with feminine qualities. I mean, the funny thing is that in some ways what we look for changes even over the course of a month. That women at peak fertility look for a more masculine, more dominant man, and during low fertility periods, they look for a man who has more of those feminine qualities and who's more likely to commit long term. Mm-hmm. And evolutionary psychologists think that the reason for this is that at peak fertility, what a woman becomes mostly interested about, and I should say, we keep talking about this, almost all of this is occurring subconsciously. Like, women don't consciously think like, oh, now I'm at peak fertility, I'm going for the masculine guy. This is all subconscious, but they think that what happens is at peak fertility, what women become mainly interested in is a guy with good genes. And when they think good genes, they think that kind of masculine ideal that we have in mind, right? Mm-hmm. Someone with a strong jaw, big strapping guy, dominant, But this is not necessarily the kind of guy who will make the best partner, right? He may not even be the type of guy who's willing to commit.
Right.
So then during low fertility periods, they look for that other kind of guy, right? That guy who seems much more likely that he'd be a good dad, right? Maybe not the best genes, but much more likely to stay around and help raise the kids. So, okay, that was a long windup, but now let's get to your question. Uh-huh. So, you're absolutely right. I mean, there are certain things that they found that vary among men. I mean, testosterone is one, although the funny thing is men's testosterone varies widely over the course of any given day. And they found that also his relationship status will change things. So, a guy, once he gets married, his testosterone will drop. And if he has kids, his testosterone will drop even more. If he thinks his wife's cheating on him, his testosterone will ratchet back up. So testosterone is actually highly sensitive to what's going on in his social environment. But they found other things, certain genetic markers that suggest that some men are much more likely to cheat than other men, that they basically have sort of a greater appetite for risk-taking behavior, whether that comes to gambling or drinking or cheating on a spouse. And so it seems like some men do, I think about 30% have this variant of the gene, have a greater propensity to do that. They've also found that, this is going to get a little arcane, but there's something called vasopressin, which has a lot to do with how committed men become to their partner. Mm-hmm. And men have different lengths of vasopressin receptors. And so that gives them a sort of a different tendency of how committed they become. And so far, and this is by no means definitive, they found at least 17 different lengths in terms of the vasopressin receptors. Mm. So that's 17 different, variations on how committed guys can be. So there are definitely genetic components to how committed a guy will be and how willing he is to commit to a long-term relationship. That being said, none of this genetic stuff is definitive, right? That's no reason to say that a guy with, let's say, the risk-taking variant of the gene, why he can't be raised in a way that would make him just as committed and just as loving a partner as someone who doesn't have it. But it does give him a greater tendency in that direction.
Right. Do you think that someone...
that was a long answer.
Yeah. Do you think that a guy that gets married young and then, obviously gets divorced because it's not a good idea to get married young, that he's more likely to be the type of guy to commit in the future?
Well, they've done studies where they found that women at certain periods of their fertility actually prefer, single women that show up at parties prefer guys who are in relationships. And they think it's because those women see those men as already having demonstrated that they're able to commit.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if it makes the men more willing to commit, but perhaps women who date them look at them and say, oh, this guy's already been married once.
Right.
He's shown that he'll go all the way. So
right.
he might be a good partner.
Yeah, exactly. And now, why is the 20-second hug important?
Well, this is kind of a funny thing where, I think you'd be surprised. 20 seconds is really long, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it is.
That's a long hug to give someone. But what they hug someone for 20 seconds, it releases oxytocin into the system, which sort of floods you with a feeling of well-being, sense of trust. And so they found that if you hug someone for 20 seconds, you sort of have this feeling towards them. It gives you these very warm feelings towards the other person. So the 20-second hug, again, this context is everything. If you're in a relationship, things are going well, a 20-second hug might be really nice. It might be a way to solidify the bond. A first date, I think a 20-second hug, it might come across a little creepy.
Yes. You got to slowly work in that 20-second hug.
That's exactly right.
Not right away. Well,
they've also found that, for instance, 4 minutes of direct eye gazing can be very powerful. But again, you have to be in the relationship a little bit before you can bust out the 4-minute eye gaze, or they're going to think you're crazy.
Yeah, that might maybe like 6 months into the relationship or something.
Yeah, exactly. And give them some advance warning. They're going to be like, why are you staring at me? Come on.
Well, you tell them, listen, I want to do this little experiment.
That's right.
And then you sit them down. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been very enlightening with all these studies that you found about.
That was a pleasure.
Yeah, so again, the book is Decoding Love, Why It Takes 12 Frogs to Find a Prince and Other Revelations from the Science of Attraction, and the website, of course, decodinglove.com or andrewtrees.com, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for being on. Take care.
Thank you for having me on.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay. And so, let's see. I was on the news in Philadelphia just this past week, ABC News. And if you want to find the link to that, well, you'll have to be a member of my Facebook page or my Twitter, which, of course, the link is on the LA Talk Radio page. Of course, I was talking about cougars, and so check that out. And what else? Let's see. I have my website, of course, which is theartoflove.net, and I have a weekly newsletter that I send out from there, but you got to sign up, of course, and you'll find out what is going on with me, besides, of course, my multiple TV appearances. And again, that's theartoflove.net. We also have lessonsoflove.net, which is my website from my book, which is Lucia's Lessons of Love, where I answer the most asked dating and relationship questions. The things that people always wonder about, I give the answer to. So it's like a reference book, like a little encyclopedia, I guess. This woman, she bought the book. She bought the hardcover version because it's an ebook. But I gave her a hardcover, and she's like, I have it on my coffee table, and I read it every week, and I agree with everything you said. I was like, damn. I said, can you put that in writing? It's like, why are you reading it every week? Even I'm not reading it every week. So, and that is it for today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd like to again thank my guest, Andrew Trees, with his book, Decoding Love. I think that was very helpful. See, the things I always thought, I just kind of naturally know these things. That I knew you shouldn't be sleeping with guys right away, and I knew you should be wearing lipstick. The two most important things I learned from today's interview. All right. Well, until next time, remember that love inspires, empowers, uplifts, and enlightens.
You're listening to The Art of Love with your host, Lucia, right here on LA Talk Radio.